Start. We have a minion, I think. Exactly. Exactly. We can do that. Oh, let's try a post-luncheon serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom
to know the difference.
In the, oh, come on now, where are you? You were just here. In the tradition, spiritual experience, where are those little concepts? Did you pull them out? Oh, here they are. The 12th one I've reflected on a regular basis, and also in Al-Anon, because I think these are very important and rich ideas. I think they're ideas that are provocative and interesting. And Al-Anon ends with what they call the 5 general warranties. And I think these are major principles, guarantees, ways of protecting everybody. And this is what it says for the World Service Conference. Number 1, that it's only sufficient operating funds, including an ample reserve, be its prudent financial principle, similar to that 12th concept in AA. You don't need a lot of money, pay your bills, have a little reserve. 2, no conference member shall be placed in unqualified authority over other members. This is specifically for those of us who are afraid of the cult. The program's a cult, Well, there are some places where some people act culty. I mean, that's very possible. But we watch out for that. We don't think it's a good thing. You're not in unqualified authority over anyone. 3, that all decisions be reached by discussion, vote, and whenever possible by unanimity, substantial unanimity. Al-Anon just says unanimity. And sometimes it takes a long time to sort that out. There's a justice of the Supreme Court put on the court, I guess, in the 1940s, and he was there till the 1960s. His name was Felix Frankfurter, which sounds like a made-up name, but it was a real name. He was the second Jewish member of the United States Supreme Court. The first was Justice Brandeis. But this is Felix Frankfurter. And he wrote a lot of opinions. He had a lot to say. He was a very educated man. And one of the things he said about controversy, arguing, he said there are issues about which reasonable people of goodwill disagree. And I have to remember that because I have a tendency to think if you disagree with me, you're not just wrong, you're stupid. That's my opening understanding. But there are issues about which reasonable people disagree. And that's kind of a live and let live. Not everything has to be decided or solved. There's more than one way up Mount Fuji, all those things. Substantial unanimity. 4, that no conference action ever be personally punitive or an incitement to public controversy. Tim mentioned, the treasurer that runs off with the funds. We don't track them down and put them in jail. We don't prosecute those things. One of the reasons is because it makes you crazy if you do that. If you start being litigious, argumentative, I'll sue, all recovery goes right out the door. Also sanity and common sense. There was a conference in California held every year in November in Yosemite National Park, which was made by the glaciers over many thousands of years. Brilliant place. John Muir, who was a Scottish fellow who came to the the states and helped develop the national park system. John Muir said, if you want to see the face of God, come to Yosemite. And I've been there several times. Every November we had this Yosemite conference, and there'd be 800 or 1,000 people in this extraordinarily beautiful place. I liked it a lot. That was going somewhere. And I got distracted by Yosemite. Just a second. Ask God for help. Oh, the treasurer for the conference at Yosemite National Park ran off with the funds. And it was money of 800 people. It was several, amounts of money. And this person just ran for the hills with it. AA did not prosecute, but the county did. Because it was happening at an official place. And I don't know the outcome of all that. But being personally punitive doesn't help anyone. Part of our tradition is if we're criticized, Tim mentioned this, if we're criticized and the criticism's valid, you can privately thank that person. You don't have to grovel or be ashamed or, public humiliation, but your critics will try to cooperate with this, but your world doesn't have to come to an end because you've been criticized or you've done something that could be criticized. I have been criticized on more than one occasion. It's true. By heartless swine, of course, but nevertheless. 5, that though the conference serves Al-Anon, it will never perform any act of government. And that, like the fellowship of Al-Anon family groups which it serves, it shall always remain democratic in thought and action. So the warranties are very much like the 12th concept in AA. Very, very similar to that. And I like the fact that we are democratic in thought and action. Bill W. and a whole bunch of other people in the early fellowship believed in grassroots activity, people on the ground working together, not way up there, high, but let the people gather and make decisions. And I think that's a very good thing. One of the traditions also talks about, this is tradition number 10, that for our group sanity, we want to stay away from controversial issues. It specifically mentions religion and politics and alcohol reform. Historically, the alcohol reform thing has a strong reference to the Prohibition years in the United States from 1920 to 1933, where the sale, manufacture, and distribution of alcohol was banned by constitutional amendment. During those years of Prohibition, both Bill and Bob were drunk for a regular time, which I like very much. And crime flourished. And there were all sorts of things happening. When it was clear that alcohol was going to be banned to protect America from foreigners. Beer-drinking Germans, wine-drinking Jews, whiskey-drinking Irish, wine-drinking Italians who live in the big cities, Chicago, New York. So if we outlaw alcohol, we'll protect ourselves from those foreign, strange people and the big cities. At the same time, women got the right to vote, which I know is controversial, and I have no position on it. But it's one more thing that we want to be cautious around. The thinking was if women can vote, they'll support prohibition. And the way the issue was phrased is, are you a wet or a dry? Wets being people for the availability of booze. And what kind of booze? Beer, wine, spirits, all of it was banned. They took the most extreme measure possible, knowing this was coming, because you could see it 3, 4, 5, 6 years ahead. Our Canadian relatives to the north built huge distilleries. And in the Bahamas and Jamaica, they built these huge distilleries, knowing that there was going to be a market for this. And so those sweet, polite Canadian people would have vast amounts of booze come over Lake Michigan to Detroit. At one point in 1927, they thought that 3,000 boats a day were carrying booze from Canada into Michigan. And then from Michigan down to Chicago to that nice Mr. Capone, who would distribute it throughout the Midwest. And the governor of Illinois was a Republican named Big Jim Thompson, and he said, "Prohibition's crap. We're not enforcing it in the state of Illinois." And in Al Capone's office, he had a picture of the governor, my favorite governor, he said. Crime flourished, a lot of things flourished. It was a nightmare. But alcohol reform, we're not going to talk about that because it makes people crazy. So it goes away in 1933. Bill gets sober in 1934, 35, 36. Those years are, this is still a real hot issue. And politics, we don't agree on anything politically. We want to stay away from that. And that can be really tough because everyone has a point of view. And it's explosive stuff. So at meetings and in recovery, I have occasionally thought I could innocently poke some fun, lighthearted fun, at some political figures, and you can't. Some people who had no sense of humor did not find it funny, even though it was hilarious. So the political stuff. I went to Poland in the early 80s. Carter's president, Brezhnev's president. I was working in Scandinavia that summer, and I had about 10 days after, and a friend of mine in recovery showed up, and we thought we'd go to Eastern Europe, one of my few forays into Eastern Europe, and I went into Poland with my friend Jim. We went by bus, and we went around, and we met. There were sober Polish people in Stockholm, and they connected with sober Polish people in Poznan, Krakow, and Warsaw. We were taken care of. And I think it was in Warsaw, we stayed with this fellow and his wife and 2 kids. He was sober a few years. And a few years before, he was a very active member of the Solidarity movement. Military government, the communists are running everything. Solidarity was the defiance of the government program. Lots of people went to jail. And my host was one of those people who spent some time in jail. He gets sober. And how does that even happen? There's a tiny bit of alcoholism in the Slavic community. You might be aware of that. The occasional Russian, the occasional Pole, on occasion, have overserved themselves. That's safe. Well, a Polish guy gets sober somewhere in the States, gets active in the program, and he writes letters home about this program of recovery. And a few other people get sober, and a few other people get sober. And there is a Communist Party magazine that comes out once a month, and it tells you lots of things. And they asked for an article about Alcoholics Anonymous. And they wrote an article about Alcoholics Anonymous, 12 steps, mentioning God, a whole bunch of other things, and that if you want to contact someone, here's some phone numbers. Now, Poland is a military place and a communist state, and if you're going to have a meeting, you have to register with the police. And you have to register names with the police. They don't have to be real names, they just have to be names. So you had your real name and then your recovery name. I met a woman there, she said, my name is Olga, but in Al-Anon, I'm Anna. So They would list names. If you have trouble with your drinking, call these numbers. And my friend Adam, the Polish fellow, his name was listed. He has a couple years of sobriety. And the phone rings. And there's someone who needs help. And Adam and another guy make a 12-step call on this fellow who's reaching out for help. And Adam found out that he was making a 12-step call on the man who sent him to prison. And Adam was that man's sponsor. Because outside issues stay outside. I just think that's a staggering story. I don't think I have enough program or goodwill to do that. I'd want the person slowly dead. But I'm not in that circumstance or that situation. Religious stuff. You know, it's we have no opinion. And there's all kinds of individual members with strong opinions. And if we don't argue about that during meetings, it's going to be just fine. But I've noticed that people come in with baggage, people come in with prejudices, people come in with bad experiences. We don't want to talk about it. At my home group meeting, which is Tuesday nights in Oakland at 6:30 Pacific time, we have people from a lot of backgrounds. The Rabbi David used to go there. 2 priests, several very happy atheists, and a variety of other people. One of our resident atheists is a fellow named Alan, whom I love. He's just splendid. And whenever the topic was God, you could see him just going, suffering because of the topic. By the way, personally, if the topic is what is your concept of a higher power, I do the same thing. Oh, because I don't want to hear. I don't care, and you're nuts. And I've thought about this, and I don't want to know how you think about this unless we're having coffee later. Because it just gets so weird, especially where I live. It gets very weird. And Alan, I remember at the end of a meeting, I said, Alan, would you like to lead us in a prayer of your choice? And he said, I don't pray. Long sobriety. I don't pray. Okay, calm down. And I then said, Alan, will you lead us in a moment of silence? And he said, I can do that. So we had a moment of silence led by Alan. This is such a big thing. It's written about in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions under tradition number 3, the only requirement for membership. And what does it say? This is on page 139. A member gives us a vivid glimpse of those early days. At one time, he said, every AA group had many membership rules. Everybody was scared that somebody or something would capsize the boat and dump us all back into the drink. So alcohol plus the ocean. Our foundation office asked each group to send in its list of protective regulations. The list was a mile long. If all those rules had been in effect everywhere, nobody could have possibly joined AA at all, so great was the sum of our anxiety and fear. We were resolved to admit nobody to AA but that hypothetical class of people we termed pure alcoholics. Except for their guzzling and the unfortunate results thereof, they could have no other complications. So beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women were definitely out. Yes, sir, we'd cater only to pure and respectable alcoholics. Any others would destroy us. Issues. You know? And what they found out was all those fears were groundless. It helps. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And we come in not because of our political stuff or religious stuff or our feelings on whether there should be dry or wet, but because we have a common need to recover. We have something in common. And that's what we want to focus on. Stay away from the crazy, focus on the common. And that takes some discipline. And I'm usually pretty good at this. Every so often, I've been to a meeting and someone is really out of line on this. They'll bash the church. They'll bash the mosque. They'll bash the synagogue. Their venom comes up. And that's not a topic for a meeting. And no one knows that you're the croup bigot. You know? They think you're speaking for Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon. They don't know that you're the craziest person in the room. The rest of us do. But if someone's out of line on that, it's sometimes I have said out loud, that's not a topic for a meeting. I've intervened, not often, because it made everyone crazy. And so these are traditions for the safety of the group and the common welfare of the group. And we're glad to see you. Now, you might have a lot of other issues. That's fine. Come on in. We're going to focus on this one. Others focus on other things. We have so much in common. And that line in the Al-Anon traditions that I reflect on a regular basis, that the Al-Anon family groups, it's tradition number 5. Practicing the 12 steps, encouraging, understanding, welcoming, and giving comfort. And therefore, it's real important to keep the outside issues outside. Especially if things are explosive. I was at one meeting. Newcomers were present. Anyone have 30 days, 60 days? People came up and they were at an evangelical recovery house of some kind, and each one of them wanted to thank Jesus Christ, their personal Lord and Savior, for their sobriety. That's so inappropriate. It's just wrong. So I say that to you as an alcoholic and a priest. It's just wrong. And the things we have in common, you know. Last point, and then Tim. There's a discipline to working to bring people together. It's really easy to start a fight. And I can do that by being snarky or sarcastic, or my own prejudices come up, and there are groups that just appall me, you know. I go all over the United States leading retreats for people in recovery. And some places are so different than where I live. And I observe the traditions. Don't be snarky. I was in the border state between the North and South, and I was talking about prohibition. And there were half a dozen books are written about it with its 100th anniversary. And one of the books said that the passage of prohibition was the first real increase in federal power, 1920. Because you have passed this law and you have to enforce it. It's not Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, it's prohibition. I think that's interesting. I think that can be talked about. So there's lunch afterwards, and there was a fellow there who looked at me with squinty eyes, and he said, "I disagree with you." And I said, "On what?" He said, "About prohibition being the first real increase of federal power." And I said, "What do you think it was?" He said, "When Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves." And I had a realization, for every year of recovery, you get one more second of response time. I had a realization that this could be the rehashing the Civil War. And I turned to the person next to me and I said, "Aren't these peas delicious?" Which should be another Al-Anon slogan, if you need to change the topic. And that's everything I know.
Tim, Alcoholic and Al-Anon. I've got a few unrelated points which I've thought of whilst Tom was speaking. A friend of mine is a military doctor. She's a corporal in the British Army. And now, with politics and the United Kingdom, as it's currently called, you can't even say the name of one of the constituent countries without making a political statement. Is it Northern Ireland or is it the north of Ireland? My friend was deployed in Belfast when the Troubles were at their height. And she walks into a meeting, which is pretty much the only place in Belfast where Catholics and Protestants are in the same room, and no one, everyone knows who is who, but no one mentions. And she walks in as a British officer into the midst of this. The British military are considerably more popular with one of the two communities than with the other. And they greeted her warmly. This was her first meeting, and they looked after her. At the other end of the scale, it's very popular in London. If you want to give everyone a laugh at a meeting, you say, well, I'm not just a recovering alcoholic, I'm a recovering Catholic. And then everyone comes in with how they're a recovering... I was with a Catholic newcomer once who said, I don't feel particularly... I get that these people are jerks, but nonetheless, I don't feel particularly comfortable where the culture in the room is to disparage the most important thing in my life. On the political stuff, I've made mistakes on that. I've made assumptions about what I think the political leanings in the room are, and I've been radically wrong. I let the guard down and let myself say things, and I discovered afterwards you cause a lot, because people will remember that. They'll remember nothing else about you but that one comment. And someone was once trying to explain who I was to someone else, and they were trying to explain, and eventually the penny dropped, and the woman said, "Oh, that Tim." So you've said something somewhere. With political stuff, one of the real difficulties when you sponsor someone, you're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what bothers the person, with resentments and fears and so on. And part of my process when I go through the steps, in page 67, where are my mistakes? I'm looking at where I'm not seeing things straight, where my perception is distorted, where I make these gross unfair generalizations about groups of people or situations. My observation, I may be wrong, over the last few years, a lot of people, including myself, got a lot worse. I think I'm on the way out of it now, in terms of only reading one part of the media and getting myself very, very fired up, reading one half of the media. And lots of sponsees have got... I've had lots of sponsees who've got very, very hot under the collar about all sorts of things. And that started to come into AA and Al-Anon but my AA was where it was happening the worst because the face-to-face meetings. My Al-Anon is mostly online. My AA is mostly face-to-face, with questions around complying with government regulations on social gatherings, where your view on whether or not the group should comply with those was very much a political statement. It's very, very difficult. Now, I don't want to go into that, but the point is, people's step fours a couple of years ago, 70% of what was on there was very highly charged political stuff, which was very extreme. And I found it very hard to work with people who are in a tiny little corner of the media world and the societal world with some very unusual views. And how do you work with that? Do you challenge? I don't have an answer to that, but I've had some people have been really, really willing to say, you know what, I've let myself go down lots of rabbit holes, and I want to find a way to look at all sides of a situation and to come back to some facts and away from some of the extreme emotion-driven points of view. Some people are really open to that. When they're not, what I've learnt is to not even engage. So if you're not willing to look at this, I totally get that, because I took a long time to get close to certain issues. I might not be the right person to help you on this stage of the journey. And to be willing to say, you think of the time you spent on step 1, step 2, step 3, all the step 4 stuff, and then you get to that, and to say, it is okay to say, I can't do this with this. I don't know how to address this without crossing a line. And to be able to say the investment of time, it's not lost, but to cut your losses at that point, and then they find someone else and they find another way through. I'm not the right person for everyone. And I've had, you see, I have a tendency to develop very extreme views, and I let myself have those views unpicked by my other half, by my sponsor, by other people in my life. Not everyone is at the stage where they're able to do that, and that's fine. And for lots of reasons, I think I sponsor more people with mental illness than some other people that I know. It's partly, if you've been around for a while, you can sometimes get the hardest cases. And quite often, my experience is that a lot of the political stuff, the very extreme stuff, there's some mental illness going on as well. Sometimes I'm not going to get technical, but there's some other stuff going on, and until that is dealt with, sometimes the inventory can't be looked at in as much depth. And to know when I can't do anything about that. When someone is very, very paranoid, I can't challenge that. The willingness to look at things differently has to come from the inside. So I've learnt to back the hell off when it's very difficult and say, I don't know how to do this. I don't know. I absolutely don't know how to help here. I also thought of, there's a little technical point about authority. When you're the chair of an intergroup or a region or something, you've been elected by that body. So the people that you are serving as the chair are also the people that you're accountable to. So they can remove you if they don't like what you're doing. So you don't really have, as a chair of the intergroup or region, you don't really have any or anything more than moral authority really over people. You can't tell people what to do. But there's one exception in the structure where it doesn't quite work like that. And it's a very odd situation. I've experienced it a couple of times. London Region North will occasionally set up a subcommittee. And we set up a subcommittee to handle a service workshop. We were going to do a service workshop and have lots of people talk about different aspects of service, public information, and whatever else. Now, one person was appointed by the region to be the officer, to be the chair of the subcommittee. And so that chair is accountable to the region who voted that person in. They're responsible to them for doing a certain task to set up the service workshop, make sure it functions. And that chair couldn't do the job alone. They had to bring in a bunch of volunteers to help. Now to get the job done required real cooperation on the part of the committee members. Now, the attempt, what you try and do is to do it as democratically as possible in accordance with Concept 12. So you try to get a consensus between you as the chair of that subcommittee and all the people who volunteered. So you want to get a feel of what people's views are and come to joint decision-making. But when push comes to shove and there is a conflict, the chair has to be able to pull rank over one of the volunteers because they're accountable not to the volunteers but to the region. Because someone has to be accountable for the decisions that were made. And there was one of these service workshops where the chair had got a volunteer A, who we'll call Bobby, to be the sort of the compere, the MC for the day, to introduce the speakers, to read the script, and to make sure that the questions and answer session went smoothly. And he was prepped for months on this. He'd written the script. It was all perfectly set up. He understood what the purpose and the function of the day was. He was very well prepared. One of the other committee members on the day decided, let's call her Sally, decided that Peter would be a much better representative of a particular group. He'd be much better. And she asked him to take the place of this other person. Unprepared, didn't know the script, not prepped in any way at all. And the chair had to say no. Now, this looks like absolute authority because at the end of the day, it was the chair that was accountable to the region for the effectiveness and well-runness of the workshop. So they had the authority to do that. Why is it not unqualified? It's because if Sally really thought a terrible injustice had been done, she could exercise Concept 5, write a note, and have it read out at the region meeting. Sally didn't do this. But it's the one situation where I've seen, and board members as well, and this is in Great Britain, it may be different in other countries, when the board member ran the subcommittee for armed services, the board member was in charge of that subcommittee. He would listen very carefully. He trusted and respected and liked the people in the room, but he knew the board and he knew who he was accountable to, what would fly, what wouldn't fly, what would be acceptable, what would fit in with other policies which had been agreed, and he had the final word. And when he said no, it was no. And there was an example where if AA had paid a very minimal subscription fee to an association of charities, and the fact that we would have paid the fee would have been not in the public domain at all, then we could have put lots of materials about AA on this charity website. And 6 people on the subcommittee said this is a brilliant idea, such a good opportunity to get the AA message out there. And the board member said no. Tradition 6, this is a formal affiliation and endorsement of an outside endeavour. You can't do it. Boom. Now, we found a different way. The association voluntarily said, give us your materials, we'll put this on, we'll mark it as an external organisation. So we weren't endorsing them, but they could endorse us, our friends can recommend us. But I had to recognise as a member of that subcommittee, it wasn't 6 again. The majority of the people in the room were in favour of that measure, but he was the board member. He was accountable to the board as a custodian of AA tradition as a whole. So it's a very odd situation with subcommittees. The reason it's relevant is when the intergroup has a convention or some other event, the chair of the convention is the chair of the convention, and they're accountable to the intergroup, not to the other members of the convention committee. You want to bring people's views in as much as possible, but it's different than, you can't be overridden. The best you could do is the members of the committee could petition the intergroup and say, we really need to get rid of Bobby. We think he's doing a terrible job. Can you do something about this? There are measures that can be taken. There is always a way of dealing with it if you've got a loose cannon there. And just a couple more things. Cultish practices. I've seen newcomers really freaked out by the repetitive readings. In London, we don't do it as much. In America, it's a lot of meetings. The traditions are read every single time. How it works is read every single time. People get off-put by the prayer at the beginning, particularly if it's the Lord's Prayer. There are lots of things, we're not a cult, but there are lots of things which might look cultish to some people. And with those little ritualistic things, there are things which fly in some places and don't fly in others. I have been to a number of conferences in America where at the break of each session, everyone gets into a ring and they hold hands and no one says anything and there's a moment of silence. And when you're at one of those conferences, it's rather sort of beautiful and moving, at least the first few times. Wears off after a while. So I quite liked it. We tried it at my home group in London, and it freaked people out. People loved the idea, but people were like, we have to touch each other and just stand there in silence and do what? And it just didn't work.
I find standing in circles offensive.
Do you?
I do.
Northern California.
I just don't like it. And people do it, and I'm opposed. Yeah, just so you know. I just stand there resenting. Yeah.
Just one last thing. Sometimes there's a way of sort of breaching the principle whilst trying to make it look as though you're not. So sometimes people will say, I've got my own everyone can have whatever higher power they want, but I have a higher power who I choose to call, and then they give the name. Just because you couch it in nice terms doesn't mean you're not proselytizing. And the word God maybe shouldn't trigger people, but it does. And so, and it doesn't matter. I very often, especially if I'm in a meeting where I sense from the vibe that there is going to be some hostility to that, I'll say higher power. And use pronouns which don't offend people either. But it doesn't hurt to do that, to just keep saying my higher power rather than he, she, or it, or giving multiple, or they, just my higher power, my higher power, my higher power. And no, I've never Have I been bothered? Have you ever seen anyone bothered by higher power?
I'm sure someone is, because someone's bothered by anything. But I use the more general rather than specific. It's more general, and it can be used that way. I'm nervous about the pounding the drum, for your own tribe. When the Big Book is translated into Thai, and there have been, I think, 2 or 3 translations, and you're going into a Buddhist country and a Buddhist culture, and all the thinking is different. And one of the solutions to translate the word God was to translate the good spirit. So I think that's what they settled on, the good spirit. And that didn't make people as crazy, but it was a cultural thing. Yeah. So. Questions about anything. I'm full of, what?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you discussed politics and, that we should stay away from that. And what's an outside issue?
Like women voting.
What?
Like women voting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very controversial.
Yeah, very controversial.
So in Remulac, they have a problem. We have a problem with some people in AA think that Al-Anon is an outside issue, and they're very, very suspicious about the Al-Anon people and what they, like the relationship and even things. So, it seems to be like a slippery slope. Like what does it mean, cooperation? Like in Al-Anon traditions, it says we should always cooperate. We should cooperate with AA. Is there anything in AA literature that says we should cooperate with Al-Anon? Because they seem to think, no, that's an outside issue.
Be Friendly with Our Friends is a pamphlet. And you're going to find bigotry and stupidity everywhere. So, and in Texas, the state of Texas, which is a totally different universe, in Al-Anon, they say, if you're a member of another 12-step program, we're very happy for you. We don't want to hear about it. They make it very clear. And so I don't when I'm there at an Al-Anon function. Frequently, when I share at an AA thing, I talk AA, but I mention I'm an Al-Anon. And that, usually that doesn't flip out anybody, but there's always someone who's grossly offended by it. But let's be friendly with our friends.
No, but I'm not talking about offending people. I'm talking about there's a conference.
Yeah.
Okay? There's a conference, and we want to invite Al-Anon.
Yeah, there'll be like an AA convention with Al-Anon participation or an Al-Anon conference with AA participation. That's usually how it's advertised where I live.
Okay, so, but the AA people, we say I think they probably spent 20 minutes discussing what should be on the flyer. If it should be Al-Anon participation, or that offended people, so they wanted with Al-Anon meetings. Al-Anon will be there, but we'll give them a little corner in a back room so nobody will see them, and we don't want their literature out front. And
One day they'll be dead, and then you can change it.
Or drunk.
Yeah, or drunk. Yeah, it's too. Yeah, we're friends. Be friendly with your friends. We're companions. We're allies, and we're friends. Don't be afraid to act like companions and friends and allies. Seems to me. Yeah, but we're being rational, and not everybody at a meeting is rational. Some have issues, Sarah. They have issues. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question to that. On Remulac, am I saying that right? We have an opportunity to share the expense of a hotline for AA and for Al-Anon. And we've been having a discussion as to whether or not that violates traditions either way, the third tradition and the fourth tradition. It's an account that has an option to have different phone numbers, and so can AA use one of the phone numbers and Al-Anon use one of the phone numbers, and one of them pay the other one for the privilege of doing it. The bottom line was, why don't you just buy your own account? Does it matter? In other words, now there's money involved, is my question. So
Yeah. I know in Los Angeles, the answer would be yes, it matters, and have two different lines. That's just how they run things there. What's practical, what's possible, what's simple. Yeah.
There's also technical difficulty. It's fine when everyone's getting on, but when people stop getting on, then you've got two fellowships and two collective consciences. Which one takes precedence? And it can't be resolved. It talks in the concepts, or Bill talks in the concepts, about double-headed management not working. And am I going to say this? It's on the tape. No, I'll do it, but I'll anonymise it even more than I normally would. In Great Britain, AA, to use the AA name when you're holding an event, you must have the event sponsored by an intergroup, a region, a collection of regions, or the national organisation. And what being sponsored by these bodies means is that you are financially and operationally accountable to the fellowship as a whole through the sponsoring body, the intergroup, the region. Because it's got the financial clout behind it, it's got the people behind it, if necessary, to sort stuff out. So that if the committee is making a real mess of it, which happens, the chair and other people on the committee can simply be replaced. So under Concept 3, you've got various measures when your trusted servants are not really performing as they should. You can reprimand in some way. You can redirect what they're doing. You can reorganise the committee, or you can replace the committee. The 4 R's in Concept 3. So that there's no real risk there. You can trust people because there is a mechanism for setting things straight when they go off track. And I've seen that at conventions where the planning is just terrible and the intergroup says you need to sort that out. And this is how we can help you do it. And it's sorted out. There are some conventions. There is one of the continents, on one of the continents, there is a convention which floats around from country to country. And that convention, it's an annual convention, is run by a board which is self-replicating, as it were. The board members for that convention come from attendees of the conference. And they have a non-profit in one of the countries through which they run the bank accounts and so on. Now, when they went to one of these countries, they said, we want to hold this convention, the so-and-so AA convention, and we'd like to publicise it through the service structure of your country. And the country said, you can do that, but we need operational and financial custodianship over it, so that if there's a risk of breaching AA traditions or concepts or bringing AA's name into bad repute, we can do something about it. And they said, we can't do that because our board is accountable to this non-profit. If there's a problem, who's in charge? Is it the region, or is it basically the board of the non-profit? You've got double-headed management, which is fine as long as there isn't a dispute. Once there's a dispute, you don't know who's really in charge, and it couldn't be held in that country. And there are cases where very badly run conventions, again, I'm being very careful because of the tape, but very badly run conventions, particularly when the two things which go wrong are very bad behaviour on the part of the attendees of the conference, causing problems with the venue and it getting into the press. That's happened. Venues being wrecked, bills not being paid, and someone on the committee being lumbered with a five-figure sum owed to someone or other. And the national structures have had to come into a situation in which they weren't involved to fix it, to fix the relations locally, to pay off the debts, and it's in a number of places it's brought AA into disrepute. One particular city in America where one of these conferences, the place was not looked after by the convention, and it was a place where AA conventions have been held for decades, and the venue said no more, that's the last one. So these events which are outside the structure can be very dangerous, and having it kind of co-signed on paper, sponsored by the so-and-so intergroup or region or area or district, unless there's real custodianship of that, it doesn't mean anything. It's a dangerous co-signing. So that's the point about double-headed management.
Israel.
My question is that the 10th tradition of AA reads, Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues.
Right,
Hence the AA name will never be drawn into public controversy.
right.
So every once in a while, I'll be in a meeting and someone will share something about their drug addiction or their sex addiction or their political affiliation.
Right.
And someone else will scream in a very loving, humility-filled way, "That's an outside issue!" Which brings me to mind of our first tradition, which says, not in this tradition itself, but in the explanation of the tradition. Let me see if I can find it. It's in that first page, maybe 2 paragraphs down, where it talks about the individual's right. It says, surely we would never want to compel a fellow member in what they think, say, or do. It seems to me that we compel fellow members in what they think, say, or do. We tell them not to curse. We tell them only to talk about their alcoholism. Did you see any
There may be tension there,
tension between those two statements?
maybe even paradox. Yeah. I've been to meetings where, please mind your language, and, there are ladies and gentlemen here, and so on. And that's when I really want to be vulgar and awful. I usually don't, but every so often I do. I can use some very graphic language because it seems like such a good idea. So there's a discipline in speaking in ways that enhance rather than detract. But yeah, there's all kinds of paradoxes in this thing, and especially as we go into political stuff, election years and things like that. And in my country, we're just always doing it. The occasional reminder that we're not going to talk about that stuff is very helpful. And so sometimes if I'm speaking at a large meeting, I'll bring it up as just a topic and say this is why we don't do that. COVID and stuff, wearing the masks and government mandates, and I was at a meeting in Los Angeles, and I mentioned that I thought vaccinations were for the common welfare. And wearing masks for the common welfare. This is when things were very tense all over. And one fellow took great exception to that and let me know that. But I think I'm right. I mean, he and I are going to disagree on that. Yeah. But the common welfare. Nothing is. I mean, there's always looking at things and seeing what's different, and times are different, and to have a safe place where people are respected. You can say what you need to say. Confidentiality is observed. Those are pretty good meetings. Those are pretty good meetings. One of our friends from Southern California, the topic was confidentiality. His name was Jostler. He was from a Seventh-day Adventist family from Brazil. Very exotic. And he said, confidentiality is confidentiality. And anonymity is anonymity. But news is news. and he introduced that, encouraging people to remember not to gossip and not to be so chatty, and because we can be very casual about things sometimes. But what happens at meetings, the privacy of that's important. The again, back to that Al-Anon tradition of welcoming, encouraging, supporting people who have been hurt. Takes some time. It takes some time for healing. And it takes some time to grow and develop understandings and ways of proceeding. And I'm glad there's people with long-term sobriety around. It makes a difference. In the International Convention in Texas 10 years ago, old-timers were considered anybody with 40 years or more. And Saturday night, they were going to have a big meeting for old-timers, and they'd choose 10 names out of the hat, and you get 3 minutes. And there were over 500 people with 40 years or more. Over 500. It's a lot. And then they decided that was too many, so for the convention in Atlanta 5 years later, they raised it to 50 years or more. There were still over 100 people with 50 years or more. The Detroit convention got canceled because of COVID. I had my ticket bought. I was planning on going there. The next one in 2025 is in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I expect to be there. With 49 years of sobriety. So I'm sure I'll be bitter all weekend. But participation, I'm glad we can get together for this for a couple of days, but if there's an opportunity for going outside to larger groups and seeing the world, it's really very, very nice. This summer, end of June, early July, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Al-Anon's having its every 5 years international convention. And there's 4,000 or 5,000 people that show up for that. And I plan on being there, and it's good to see the fellowship. It's good to see the variety of people that are there. Lots of foreigners come.
And it's hybrid this year.
And is it good? It's hybrid this year. Very nice.
So anyone who can't make it to New Mexico can.
I hope hybrid's the way of the future. I hope it's with us for a long time. There's a lot of people who are elderly and can't make meetings. Or who are not, for a variety, unable to make meetings, but also the international, so people can get together. I think that's a real gift of the program. ¿Qué piensas?
Jim, do you have anything to share on that line from the first tradition?
Just leave people alone. Just leave people be. I've been at meetings where someone says something and someone else shouts out in the middle of the share, and I personally don't like meetings like that, because who's next?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Okay, so this might be repetitive for some of all those questions that preceded me, and maybe it shouldn't be on the tape, I don't know. But in this small country that we're talking about, almost all the people are of the same religious affiliation. And very, very often in meetings, people want to tie in their share to something related to that, especially at certain times of year. Even though we have in all our preambles and mass introductions to the meeting, we stay away from religion and all the outside.
But it's culture too, referring to culture, things we share.
Yeah.
I don't think that's in violation of tradition.
So the thing is that sometimes it sounds very religious, and there could be people who might not feel comfortable because it sounds too religious.
It might be. That's a risk.
And sometimes we have the odd visitor who is from somewhere else and of a different religious affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
So how should we handle that? Should we say it more
With kindness.
explicitly?
With
Should
kindness.
we talk to a person individually? Yeah. 'Cause
Be
it's
kind, be welcoming, be generous.
obviously, but
That's not obvious.
But does that mean letting it go, or does it mean talking to them kindly?
See how it goes. Maybe they'll understand. There's another part of those United States, the state of Utah, where the dominant church is the Mormon community, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they are very definite in 1,000 things, and it's overwhelmingly members are of that church. So that becomes a special culture that gets talked about, and there are some similarities. So it's. It's a big topic, I guess, is what I'm saying, and it's not just related to Israel. There are lots of places where that can happen.
Right.
Be sensitive to it.
But we risk, if we're sensitive to the people who share like that, we are risking not being sensitive to the people who
So there's risks.
will not want to come back to a meeting because it's too
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, that's a risk. So heads up, common sense, be welcoming,
I think also it's how you're talking about a religious thing. So if what you're sharing about is how exhausted you are because you're having to clean the whole house and look for particular types of food stuff in hidden corners.
There's yeast here somewhere!
Before a religious festival in this country of Remulak.
Yeah.
Now that's just a cultural reference.
Yeah.
And if there's someone from Sweden in the room, you just look at them. We're doing extra cleaning at this time of the year, just so you know. And then you carry on with the story, which is fine. But when you start, if you were to start to tie principles of step 11 in with particular practices of a religion, or you're peppering what you're saying with religious jargon. So if you're talking about prayer, you might, and it might be an idea you get from the religion. So you might say, when talking about step 11, it's really important for me to not just say the prayers, but really have an intent and a meaning behind it. You can say that in a language that anyone can understand. You don't need to say kavanah to do it. So often people will signal religious affiliation by using particular pieces of terminology to create a link with other people with the same, because you say it's one religious affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to an extent it's one, but there are,
Yeah, I've noticed
and there are
some
tensions
differences.
there.
So there are examples of people using the lingo,
Mm-hmm.
and there are examples of people quoting names of, rabbis, and there are examples of people, maybe this is different, maybe it's the same. Let's say in September when we're talking about step 9, saying, oh, it's so amazing how it ties in with, what we do at that time of year. And they'll be more explicit than I was just.
I'm not offended by that.
You don't live here.
Yet.
This is kind of exactly what I'm talking about. Even if, as a principle, we try not to be specific and we try to signal, I'm talking about the member who isn't trying to do that.
Okay.
Don't they have the right, as stated in the first page of Condition 1, to say and speak however they want?
My Wednesday Al-Anon meeting, almost everyone in that meeting belongs to another fellowship as well. And so there'll be members of AA or OA or SLAA or something else, but they're loving Al-Anon. They're really getting into Al-Anon, and we have a bunch of Al-Anon readings, and it's a very unusual format, and it's great. And we're getting 30 or 40 people, and I'm really loving it. But we say very explicitly at the beginning, if you're in an addiction fellowship, we don't want to know, we don't care. Please do not discuss your problems with addiction here. Introduce yourself as an Al-Anon or just as an Anon. Now, I know, I'm getting there. It requires a lot of stuff around the point. Now, if someone actually then starts to talk about that, no one stops them, but there's the same little message at the beginning of the meeting every single time. My experience over the years is that with very few exceptions, people will try it on for a few times sometimes to try to get a reaction out of the meeting. And I've had it at big book groups of very interesting examples of this. When I got sober, the big book was hardly used in AA in London. Last 15 years, it's changed. And people work the steps chiefly using the big book, not the 12 and 12, and it's a very different fellowship in lots of ways. But at big book meetings, of which there are few, at big book meetings, occasionally someone will come in and try to needle the room with how much they hate the big book and how outdated it is and how it, and my therapist said that ... And they get 3 minutes, just like everyone else. No one criticises, no one interrupts, no one says anything. And I've never seen someone do that more than 6 times in a row because it doesn't get a reaction. And when it doesn't get a reaction, there's no payoff in doing it. And so that's why I leave people be. And because almost every problem I've encountered in AA actually goes away without anyone having to do anything, because the person, when I misbehave, I'm the one who's chiefly I suffer more than anyone else from it, because I have to live with myself 24 hours a day, and my tolerance for pain is significant but not unlimited, and eventually I give up.
I was at an AA meeting in Oakland, and we had new secretaries. We every 6 months bring in. We usually have a male person and a female person, and now who cares? But the new secretary brought in the person to chair for 10 minutes, and the person only talked drugs. New in recovery, only talked drugs. I was outraged. I was so upset. This is maybe 5 or 8, 10 years ago. I was just, what's wrong? New secretary, bad. Don't you know? And I really wanted to go and clarify a few things to him as a senior member of the human race. And I didn't. And the next week, it was just fine. Sober. It was an aberration. And I was willing to react in a very aberrant, is that the word aberrant? Would you say that in the UK? Aberrant? In an aberrant fashion. And I let it go. And it never showed up again. So sometimes when I'm agitated, I just get to be agitated. My being agitated is not an emergency for the group. I hate that.
Sometimes one can play pass the parcel with one's discomfort. I feel uncomfortable, and if I can make you feel uncomfortable instead, it relieves my own discomfort, which is why I try and interfere with things. I don't know if anyone's familiar. Are you familiar with killer whale treatment?
No.
Okay, so apparently at SeaWorld, whatever that is, when they're training killer whales, whatever they are, when they're training them to perform, when the killer whale does the thing it's supposed to do, they give it a fish. And when it doesn't, it's ignored. And it was something that Clancy said, I think it was Clancy who said it's perverse to give people more attention when they're misbehaving than when they're behaving well. And so the whole, it's another aspect of leave people alone. It's not a sign of indifference. It's an expression of what can often be most successful. And I find this in sponsorship as well. I find it more effective when I will match people's enthusiasm with their work. So the more work they do, the more input they'll get from me, rather than the other way around, rather than giving all of the attention to the person that is least willing, which is my instinctive thing to do, is to find to just concentrate on how to carry the message to this one person. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yes.
I was wondering if I may have made up some stories about what I thought you were going to say, and then you didn't say it. So if you could, perhaps say something about how the concepts could relate to my personal life or my family life or my work life.
Oh God, we were going to talk about that, weren't we?
You were going to talk about
Oh,
that.
was I?
So I wasn't making.
No, I have to leave very soon, and Tim has to carry the weight for the rest of the day because I'm being kidnapped and drawn to who knows where to do who knows what very soon. But I think it's time for a break anyway. But the ongoing conversation is a good conversation. I mean, just to say that the participation, the learning, the experience of being members of this phenomenal group of people is very good. When I was in Dubai, which was just before here, I did 2 days of presentation on steps and traditions, not concepts, but steps and we had a wide variety of people there, and all involved in the program. And a couple were members of the Sikh community, guys with turbans and beards. And to hear them share the work they do, the commitment to recovery, it was lovely to me, because we have so much more in common than divides us if we're able to listen to each other. Blanche, my Al-Anon mentor in so many ways, she said part of the grown-up thing, part of the Al-Anon thing is everyone gets to take a turn. And it's my turn, it's your turn, it's my turn, it's your turn. And I think that is a good thing to remember. And in terms of leadership, in terms of service, in terms of helping out at meetings, there are a couple of things I like to do for service. At my Monday Old Timers meeting and Tuesday night meeting, which I couldn't get on. I tried Zooming and I couldn't get on from Israel's house. I was blocked.
Me too.
Oh yeah, him too. I have the keys to the room. So does the other sober Jesuit with 40 years of sobriety. He's 40, I'm 47. We get there, we open the door, we set up the chairs, we make space for people, and then we let people come in and do whatever they do, and then when they are finished, we clean up. I think that's my favorite service. Because it's a good way to help out. Nothing fancy, pretty ordinary. Anyone can lift a chair, Tim. Oh, lads, I'm done. Listen, thank you. These have been lovely days for me. I'm very grateful for your kindness and your hospitality. And as we trudge the road of happy destiny, I hope we bump into each other again. That's what I know. Thank you.